Hello and welcome to SFT Live. This is episode 4. I'm Dechen and I'm coming to you live from my family's house. We are just getting started now, so I'm just going to wait a little bit for some people to join. Hey, High Peaks. How are you? So I just started the SFT Live. I'm just waiting for some folks to join. Oh, I see a lot of familiar names on here. So just to start off again, I am doing episode 4 of SFT Live. My name is Dechen, and I am coming to you live from my family's house. This is actually my sister's childhood bedroom. She has the best Wi-Fi in the house, so that's why I'm over here. And we have this beautiful piece in the back of me that I just want to shout out. This is from SFT Boston. I actually bought this in, I think it was 2009. I bought this for my sister as a gift, and it's by Nawang Jordan, who is a really incredible contemporary Tibetan artist, and also Matt Zaccarino, who is a former SFT International Board member. So they did this piece together, and these are limited edition prints. Each one is unique, and I was lucky enough to get 2 of them. I also just wanted to shout out that SFT Boston has been doing the Boston Tibet Vigil every single Saturday since March 2008. And the only time this vigil has ever stopped is now due to COVID-19, and it's just interrupted on hold. But it's really incredible that they've continued to do this every single Wednesday since 2008. So today I am actually going to read SFT's 5 recommended books to read while in quarantine. And you can find out where to purchase them by clicking on the link in our bio. Many of these are available as ebooks. So we are going to start off with Memoir, A Home in Tibet by Sering Wangmo Dompa. Sering is a really significant Tibetan writer who has opened so many doors for young Tibetan poets. I really appreciate her presence in this space. We have History, Dragon in the Land of Snows by Sering Shakya. This is a staple that I really recommend that every single person have in their home. It's a comprehensive history of contemporary Tibet. I don't physically have this with me right now because I stole my copy from my sister, and it's sitting in my apartment. We have fiction, The Mandala of Sherlock Holmes by Jamyang Norbu, and in the US this is published under the title Sherlock the Missing Years. Jamyang Norbu is a well-known political writer and activist, but many do not know that he also writes fiction. So, as a Sherlock fan, I am holding this copy that also belongs to my sister. For folks who are fans of Sherlock, after Reichenbach falls, Sherlock went to Tibet, and Jamyang Norbu writes about it in this book. So I'm definitely going to check this out myself. Under contemporary, we have Tibet on Fire by Sering Wuse. And this is a really essential read, and I cannot stress this enough in understanding the self-immolations in Tibet. Last but not least, we have under the category of resistance, Fortune Favors the Brave by Kiri Westby. I'm so excited to see this come to fruition. Kiri has generously donated 5% of the royalties of this book to SFT and 5% to Urgent Action Fund for Women's Human Rights. So Kiri, thank you so much for your contribution. Today we are going to be joined by Kiri of Fortune Favors the Brave. I've talked to her, and she is such an amazing ally and activist. I'm so happy to have her here today. She was a part of the famous Mount Everest action that took place April 2007 in the lead up to the Beijing Olympics. So just to put this in perspective, since I've been on this earth, I'm 29 years old right now, there have been notable moments in Tibetan history where even my non-Tibetan peers and teachers have heard about Tibet, and that's when His Holiness won the Nobel Peace Prize, when Kundun, the Martin Scorsese film, came out, and when the Beijing Olympics happened. And Kiri will now join us to tell us about her involvement in this action. Let me just add her on. And when I'm adding her, I just want to let you know that you can actually send us questions and on the bottom of your screen, you can see where you can comment. And hey, Kiri, how are you?
Hi. Oh, I'm sideways. Should
Yeah,
I change my thing?
yeah, that would be great. So
All right,
for
hold on.
folks who want to send questions, like on the bottom of your screen where it says comment to the right, there's a little question mark. So you can put your questions in there and then I'll be able to see them. Kiri, how are you?
Okay, how's that? I'm good. Thanks for calling me in and spending some time with me. I'm in my home in Mexico, in Bucerias, Mexico,
Yeah,
and I'm thrilled to be
nice,
here with
nice.
you.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so happy to have you. And it's been so great getting to know you more through your book and our phone calls throughout this process. So I
Yeah,
just
I knew
wanted
your
to start
sister
off.
from the years I was with SFT.
Yeah.
It's nice to get
I
to know
know.
you as well. Do I have a bit of a delay, maybe?
Oh yeah, there's a slight delay. So Wong Check, maybe you get off. So I just wanted to start off by asking you, how did you become interested in Tibet, or when did you first learn about Tibet?
Well, it's interesting because I was raised in a Tibetan Buddhist home. So my parents are both Tibetan, follow Mahayana Buddhism, and in the Kagyupa school of Tibetan Buddhism. So I was raised in a small Tibetan community in Boulder, Colorado. So I always knew about Tibet, and I grew up with stories about Tibet. And my parents' teacher had written a memoir called Born in Tibet that I read as a young child. That was my early introduction. And then, but when I was a teenager, a Tibetan refugee came and my parents helped sponsor him in Colorado. And he became like a brother to me. He was also a teenager. And so through his eyes, I saw a whole different side of Tibet. I saw the sort of political side of Tibet and heard the stories of from inside Tibet and his story of escaping. So
That's
I
so
guess I was always
cool.
aware of Tibet, but I wasn't actually that active. I was a human rights activist for a long time before the Everest action. But I did travel as a tourist through Tibet in 2005. And so my first introduction really to the Tibetan people was then. And while I was there, I sort of spontaneously got married in Lhasa, and we decided to do our honeymoon to Everest Base Camp on our way to Nepal. So when I was recruited by SFT to the Everest action, it was because I was the one person on the team who had recently been there and had gone through the permitting process and knew a bit of what to expect on the ground.
Wow. Oh, that's incredible. And I remember in my conversations with you, you mentioned like practicing Tibetan Buddhism and learning about nonviolent practice. But I also just want to point out that I appreciate just as a Tibetan that in being a Buddhist, you also observed and tried to learn about the situation in Tibet. And that's such a beautiful and I think much needed thing, because there's so many people who kind of forget where these teachers come from and how all of these Tibetan diasporic communities came to be in the West. So I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to learn about Tibet and also take action for Tibet.
Yeah, I think that I came from that world who sort of practiced Tibetan Buddhism, but was quite ignorant about Tibetan politics as a child. And so since the action in Everest, I feel like a bit of my role has been to sort of translate for people who've come to practice Tibetan Buddhism but don't have any real connection to Tibetan culture, and to always bringing that back into the discussions that are happening outside of Tibetan culture, but within Tibetan spiritual communities in the West.
Wow, thank you for being that person. I think we definitely need more and more of those people. So I just wanted to kind of go into your action on Mount Everest because it's so fascinating. And like I mentioned to you before, I first heard about this when I was in high school, and I had already been a long time supporter of SFT. I myself ran SFT chapters in middle school, high school, and college. And I remember when the Mount Everest action happened and just being so blown away by it. And I was really appreciative when I was reading your book just for the amount of detail that was in there. Can you tell us a little bit about the action?
Yeah, I mean, the action was interesting because I never even heard, actually, to be honest, of SFT before I was recruited. I was recruited by one of the activists who SFT had recruited to kind of put a team together of different skill sets that she knew might be needed given the particular action we were planning, which was a nonviolent banner action at Mount Everest Base Camp. And my particular role, as I came to find out during training, would be to travel with a Tibetan American who I'd never met. I had one grainy photo of, and to use whatever knowledge, but also privileges that are afforded to from my whiteness, my English language skills, my passport to help help Tendor get himself to Mount Everest and speak. So that was sort of my particular role. And up until then, I had been working for many years in war zones clandestinely, smuggling money and information across borders that others couldn't cross. And I would often go in sort of as a tourist or someone who had a lot of presumed innocence around my young face and demeanor and be able to move information. And so I had those particular skills. And when Shannon Service was the sort of lead on this action, when she called me, that was what she was calling in from me, was that skill of being able to navigate and help Tendor get to where he needed to be to send the message when the time was right. I actually went into the action with my face fully covered, thinking I may be able to maintain some kind of anonymity. None of us knew how the CCP were going to react, but at the last minute, Tendor began to sing and asked us to remove our hats. And at that moment, I put my face on camera for the first time in over a decade of human rights activism. So it was a big moment for me as well to sort of put my name and my anonymity out there and stand with Tendor in that moment. It was a big honor in my life, one of the biggest.
Well, thank you so much. I just wanted to remind folks that as we're talking, on the bottom of your screen where it says comment, to the right, if you want to insert some questions, send some to us and I'll pull some questions as we're talking. So Kiri, just to kind of let folks know, in that famous Everest action, because I so clearly remember like what this looked like, you were holding the banner, correct?
Right.
You're holding the banner. Can you tell us what that, just physically, what it takes to go to Everest Base Camp and what that experience is like? Because I know in your book you mentioned like physically what you were feeling and like that after you were detained, what that was like. Can you share some of that with us as well?
Yeah, I think, it's easy to kind of say like, oh, we were at Everest Base Camp without realizing that we were at like just under 18,000 feet. And it's hard to breathe and it's hard to move. It's hard to think straight. And we were each feeling different levels of altitude sickness in different ways, small to larger. And so I think that the whole experience physically was a lot more than I had expected. And holding up the banner and but once I was in the action, I don't remember feeling any of that. We were sort of very jazzed because well, first of all, we didn't think we would make it. We had to cross through so many checkpoints just to get to the location. And then once we got to the location, none of the equipment was working. And so no one had ever, that we knew, had ever successfully sent a satellite signal from that far and that high and sent it through the Chinese firewall before. And so the tests the day before were really disheartening. We were all sort of not sure it was going to happen. And we weren't making the connection through to the computer in New York, and that was our security strategy. We otherwise would be going in blind without any proof. And as we know now, the CCP did lie and say that they didn't have us, and for days. And so without that footage, they could have just covered the whole thing up. So it was crucial that we had that live connection. And yeah, so the physically being there was a lot of trepidation about whether or not that was going to connect and how it was going to connect, and a lot of prayer and a lot of just calling in all of the people who weren't physically with us, but who were with us in those computers and rooms in New York and all over the world, hoping for the best. And a lot of small, like, miracles, for lack of a better word, occurred, including the weather cooperating and the satellite hitting and the live feed picking up. And so that feeling was pretty incredible in the moment that it happened and Tendor began to sing. It was like we were just, I was in awe that we had gotten there and everything was working in that moment. Felt like it was destined or something. It was a historic moment for him and for the whole Tibet diaspora, the whole Tibetan world, and for me as just a human being.
You're gonna make me cry right now on SFT Live.
Well, I'm really excited that I get to share that story in literature form, and hopefully, here I brought a little copy. So this is my book, and hopefully it does tell the story of becoming an activist through the lens of that Everest action. But it does go back into sort of my early days as an activist and a lot of the mistakes that I made, a lot of the ignorances and assumptions I had. And I come up in the stories, I come up against my own internal savior narrative and white supremacy kind of thoughts about the world and heteronormative privilege. And there's a lot of stories in there of sort of becoming an activist from a place of having a lot of like a good heart and being well-meaning and making a lot of mistakes. And so through the patient lessons of activists on the front line, I learned how to add my unique assets, my unique voice to the chorus of activism rather than coming in thinking that I was reinventing anything. So my hope is that people reading the book who are themselves sort of rising to one of their greatest challenges right now can start to see themselves as activists and start to see their unique assets and start to figure out how they can help right now. So, and that non-Tibetan world reads about Tibet. I think anytime we can put stories from inside Tibet and out into bubbles in our society that don't normally have access to that world, the better. So even since I've written it, I've had at least half a dozen people say to me, you know, I'd never really heard about Tibet, or I never really understood what was happening there. So part of my hope in publishing it and in writing it and writing the stories was to continue to raise awareness about Tibet and to continue to get people to focus on what's happening inside Tibet and just to break out of those bubbles we find ourselves in. So.
Thank you so much. I just want to ask you some more questions. Actually, there's this one quote in your book that I really loved, and I think this speaks to your self-awareness and your role as an ally. And I just want to point this out, that myself and as an activist, as a Kalmyk and Tibetan young activist, I've learned so much about how to be an ally to other movements from looking at allies like yourself in the Tibetan freedom movement. So I just want to say that, I'm also learning so much from you and your journey. And I really, appreciate like a book like this to come out and see the processes that you went through to be able to get there. So I just want to say thank you. I love the quote where you said, "I promise to use every trick in my toolbox to help get Tendor home and raise his voice high." What did that mean for you?
Yeah, it meant a lot of things. On just like a nitty-gritty level, we had to apply for permits to get into the TAR, and it was complicated given that Tendor has a very Tibetan sounding name, Tenzin Dorje, the most Tibetan sounding name. And the first round of permits we applied for, we were rejected. And so in that moment, I needed to pull out kind of that stereotypical American with a lot of money and a lot of privilege who's used to getting their way, and push and say, what is it that can happen and what can we do here to bend the rules slightly. And so I was used to doing that a bit, and that was sort of something I had done in my work before, was figuring out how to leverage that privilege that I sort of had, that unearned privilege and unearned access, to move the movement forward. And I think that's what allyship is, actually. You know, I think allyship is really about recognizing if you have certain assets or gifts that could forward another movement, and figuring out how best to offer those. And usually it means waiting for them to be asked for, but how best to kind of offer knowledge to others. And that my book is full of knowledge that was offered to me as I made a lot of mistakes in my sort of desire to become an activist. So thanks for that. I think I was really proud of the work I did with SFT, and I served on the board of directors for 3 years after the Everest action, because I just believe so much in the work SFT does, and how they organize, and the grassroots, how they go to the roots and to the community to make things happen, which I think is the big lesson right now that everybody should be thinking about, which is that for a lot of people, this is, you know, this pandemic that we're in is the first time people are feeling or experiencing that level of fear that comes up when there is a war or an occupation, and not knowing how to respond. And that's obviously natural, but I think there's this like deeper lesson that we can learn if we turn to people who have lived through really difficult times, and that is around community, around grassroots organizing and mutual aid, and how to go back to the currency of community. Once the currency of money and jobs fall apart, we have each other, and we need each other. And I don't think anyone does that as well that I've ever seen as the Tibetan community pulls together. So.
Oh, thank you. I'm just going to share a question that we received. How do I do this? Can people see this question on the screen?
I can, now that I look down.
Oh, nice.
Maybe you can't even see my face.
Okay.
That's okay. Why do you think there's still a role for nonviolent direct action in the Tibet movement? Why do you think we've seen less direct actions since 2007, maybe, or 8? Maybe that's what that says. Yeah,
since 2008.
2008.
Yeah, I actually can't see the rest of that comment or that question.
Yeah, I can't either. But I think there's always a role for nonviolent direct action. I think it's what's worked. I think the Tibet movement is one of the examples we have in the world of 70 years of organizing nonviolently and winning, in terms of it still being a relevant issue for a relatively small territory. And I think we've seen it work in the past. We've seen it work in the anti-apartheid movement. We've seen it work from Satyagraha, and it looks differently. So sometimes it does look like big, bold actions on the sign of Mount Everest, and sometimes it goes underground a little bit and looks like the technology kind of actions we're seeing that Tibet Action Institute is doing, or sort of less visible organizing that is still super important and still works. And so you have non-compliance and other forms of nonviolent direct action that aren't just protests, but are community-based and show a huge difference. So like Lakar. And so, yeah, I think there is a role. I have to believe that there's a role for nonviolent direct action as an American who feels frustrated with my own government and leadership. And I have to believe that if I can look to the example of Tibetans and to others on the front lines, that we'll have allies when the time comes for mass disobedience. in the US. That's what I think.
In your book, I also love, in the book, I just want to say that I really appreciate your observation and your self-awareness and the way that you describe watching Tendor as I think you're in a car and you're driving past the Potala. Can you talk about what that moment was like for you?
Yeah. Well, and I wonder if Tendor is on here. I'm sure he has his own perspectives of what it was like for him. But
his sister just joined.
As a totally outside perspective, outside like witness to that moment, it was really profound for me because I think I had been to Tibet before. I had seen the Potala, and it's impressive. And I'd seen it as this impressive monument, this palace. And but when we managed to get to Lhasa with Tendor, and I watched him see the Potala for the first time, and I saw him not be able to hold back tears that he was hiding behind sunglasses. We were still being surveilled and watched at the time, and he was not supposed to be Tibetan or have that sort of emotional response. It was like he was witnessing it for every other Tibetan who'd been born in exile. It was like his eyes were 1,000 eyes looking at something, and it was so much deeper than my eyes and my view that it forever changed sort of what that moment felt like and what we were doing there. But the enormity of him making it back into Tibet as a Tibetan born in exile and raising his voice, and the enormity sank in that moment. It was a pivotal moment for me as an ally to watch that and recognize the weight of what we were doing, attempting to do at that point. Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to check out some of these questions. Oh, these are very interesting questions. So if you were given an option, what's the one thing that you want us as Tibetans to focus more on?
If I was given an option, I think I think that the lessons of how Tibetans have weathered through exile and how they have held together at the cultural identity and cohesiveness as a community should be heard more by people all over the world. So I believe in the power of storytelling. Obviously, I'm a writer and I've just published a memoir, but I think everybody's story of resilience is important, and I think we should shout them from the mountaintops, especially Tibetans who've come through great hardship, because people in the West need to hear those stories. We're going to need more resilience than we've ever known in our lifetimes or even our parents' lifetimes. So any lessons of resilience that you can share with others are really needed.
Well, thank you so much. I just want to also take this time to say thank you from the bottom of my heart to SFT's amazing supporters and allies over the years who work with us in solidarity. Your contribution, whether it's time, energy, or resources, is so valuable, and we're all in this together. Thank you so much. And Kiri, I want to ask you, can you please share some advice for young allies today and people who are developing their sense of self as activists and allies?
Okay, so for young allies meaning you're not sort of central to a cause, but it's a cause that you care very much about and you want to know how to support it. I guess the first is just to come at it with a listening space, listen to people who have been in movements, organizing movements, and on the front lines for a long time. And then to also like to identify and communicate your unique assets that you may have to offer to a movement, and then to let others sort of work those assets into their strategies. And so allyship is about offering what you have to offer and then letting people work that into a strategy if it's helpful, if it's useful at different moments. So to young people out there joining any movement, from the environmental movement to the racial justice movement or LGBTQI, these are movements that have been happening for a long time, and they need help and they need support, but they don't need new leadership or people coming in thinking they know how things should be done. So a big part of allyship is stepping aside and recognizing that you don't know and listening, and then stepping in when it's appropriate to be helpful. So that's my advice
Thank
to
you
young
so
allies
much
out
again.
there. Yeah, thanks for having
So
me. And I just want to tell people that they can download the book. I think that's important since people are at home, and that it's on Kindle if you have an e-reader, and that money goes to SFT from all purchases across all platforms, no matter how you get your hands on it, from a local bookstore to Kindle.
Thank you so much. And so does anyone, if you have any last minute questions for Kiri, just next to the comment box on the bottom, there's the question mark, so you can send in your questions. I'm just going to share some last minute asks from SFT. So if folks can stay on, we're going to share these asks, but if you have any questions that you really want to get out to Kiri, you can submit them below. So although we're, staying at home right now, we're social distancing and in quarantine, our work for Tibet is not going to stop. And there are a couple of things that you can be doing from home right now remotely. The first thing that you can do is join the Stop Apple Censorship campaign. As some of you may know, Apple has facilitated the censorship of all things Tibet, Hong Kong, Uyghur, and human rights on their products in China over the past several years. They've deleted virtually every VPN app in their app stores in China, preventing human rights activists and everyday people alike from safely accessing information online. VPNs are crucial for daily life in Tibet. Everyone from monks who want to access teachings from His Holiness and other Buddhist teachers, students writing research papers, or even people that want to communicate securely with their relatives and loved ones living outside of Tibet, they rely on VPNs for safety. So we need to stand together and tell Apple that their complicity is not acceptable. And you can join this campaign today by checking out the link in our bio and sign the petition. The petition already has over 100,000 signatures. And if you have Apple products especially, use that power to demand that human rights and transparency practices are happening when it comes to Tibet and China. So the second action item for today is related to the coronavirus and misinformation. This one particularly applies to all of our Tibetan viewers. As you may have seen, there is a lot of misinformation going on around the Tibetan community with the coronavirus, and Tibet Action Institute that you mentioned earlier has prepared some really great graphics in English and in Tibetan that we're going to share in our story. So let's all commit to sharing these images with at least 10 people, your friends and family, so we know how to best protect ourselves right now. And the final action item for today is to pick one of these 5 books. I'm going to pick Fortune Favors the Brave, and then also this Jamyang Norbu book about Sherlock, because I am a huge Sherlock fan. So those 2 are my next on my reading list, and my husband, I'm sure, is going to read these with me as well. So I want folks who are, looking for things to do right now, think about starting a book club while social distancing and read these books. You can find the link in our bio about where to download them and where to purchase them. And try to order ebooks. Yes, right there. So Fortune Favors the Brave. So try to order these ebooks when you can, so we can all do our part to reduce the demand for deliveries during this pandemic. Thank you so much, and remember to follow SFT for our updates throughout quarantine. Our next episode I'm also really excited about. It's going to be tomorrow, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Facebook, and it will be all in Tibetan language with Wanga La, who is a New York Tibetan lawyer, or New York-based Tibetan lawyer, and he is going to be discussing the legal implications and opportunities for people residing in the U.S. As many of you know, there are a lot of initiatives that have been rolling out to provide financial support to individuals, small businesses, and there are a lot of questions that I know I have and that others have, like who qualifies for these programs and when can we expect this financial support. So please tune into that. Let's all stay safe and stay inside if you can, please, and do our part to flatten the curve. I just want to say thank you so much, Kiri. You're incredible, and it's been such an amazing experience getting to know more about your story and to see what you've done for Tibet, what you've done for us in this movement, and for all of the other movements that you've supported. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and sharing your story with us here today. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I really had a good time meeting you and hearing from some of the younger activists that are taking over SFT, and I'm just impressed by all of it. It's my first Instagram Live, so that's exciting.
Same here. Same here.
Yeah.
So for folks who are asking, the name of Kiri's book is Fortune Favors the Brave. Oh, yeah. Click the link in our bio and you can find out where to purchase her book and download it as an ebook. So thank you so much, Simjanango. Good night.
Night.
Bye.
Bye.